Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Andrew Ginter, VP of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. I'm going to be leading this webinar. We're going to be talking about the Waterfall and ICSStrive Threat Report for 2024. Joining us is Greg Hale, editor and founder of ISSSource and ICSStrive, and Reese McNamee, Director of Industrial Security at Waterfall Solutions and lead researcher for the report. A couple of notes before we start. This whole session is being recorded, and a recording will be emailed to you within, I don't know, a week or so after we're done here. We are going to have time for question and answer at the end of the webinar. I would encourage you, please submit your questions as they occur to you. Submit your questions with the Q&A button on the bottom of the Zoom window. I think the button probably, I have a different user interface. I think the button has an indicator saying, who do you want the question to go to? Please address all of the questions to all of the panelists. Here we go. Reese, can you start us off?
You bet, Andrew. Thank you. So today we're here to talk about our new 2024 threat report. It was just published earlier this month on the 2nd of April, and you can go to waterfall-security.com/2024-threat-report and download and read your own copy. What is this report? This is the third year. Is that not right, Greg, that we have been doing this report?
It is the third year.
It's an annual report that is widely well received and everybody is interested in. It's probably Waterfall's most popular content. And what it does is it tracks deliberate attacks, cyber attacks on operational technology and industrial control systems. So that means that it doesn't count errors and omissions or somebody accidentally pressing the wrong button in a control system or site. And these incidents have physical consequences. So we care about incidents that have impacts to operations. That includes things like shutdowns, safety issues, and worse. And they're not near misses, not attacks to IT only. These are situations where the OT was impacted, and we count them in industries of a certain focus. So that includes things like building automation, manufacturing, both process manufacturing, discrete manufacturing, heavy industry, so metals and mining, smelting, other things like this, and critical industrial infrastructure like transportation and power and energy, oil and gas. And the fourth most important thing about the incidents is that they must be in the public record. We care about incidents that are credible and that you can go and examine for yourself and look at the details. It doesn't do much good to look only at incidents that are private or perhaps told to us as a cybersecurity company privately, because then it's very hard to take anything away from them. We're not allowed to discuss them. We can only just mention, oh, we've had X number of cyber attacks. That's not as useful as talking about ones that are in the public record. And as always, a complete set of all incidents that we have examined and found are found in Appendix A. And there are links there. You can go follow and check them out for yourself. Greg?
Yeah, and I just want to give a little update on what ICSStrive is all about. We started the site in 2021, and knowing back then that incidents were just growing and they were continuing to grow and rise in the industry. And the industry actually needed some kind of database to see what was going on. And while we're talking about OT cyber attacks with physical consequences in this report, ICSStrive reports on more than just these physical consequences. We also report on incidents and near misses across the industry and in some other related industries as well. And we have on our site, we have well over 1,100, almost 1,200 incidents dating back for years, and our database and the numbers just keep growing. And so it's just this year alone, within this report, we reported on about 210 incidents, of which there were physical consequences, or only 68 physical consequences. But Andrew?
Thank you for that. Let's talk about the numbers. You look at the numbers. The report includes numbers all the way back to 2010. The entire data set is included in the appendix to the report. You don't have to believe our numbers. You can go to the data set. You can go, click through on the links to the ICSStrive website, to the front page of the New York Times. You can verify for yourself these incidents. And what do the numbers show us? Well, given the criteria that Reese gave us, in the public record, deliberate attacks, not errors and omissions, with physical consequences in the industries we track: building automation, manufacturing, heavy industry, critical industrial infrastructures. How many incidents were there like that in 2010? Public record, heavy industry. There was one. It was Stuxnet. There was nothing in 2011. There was lots of attacks, but they were stealing information. This was the era of black energy and Dragonfly. There was 2 in 2012. There was nothing in 2013. It bounced around between 0 and 5 for the whole decade. For the whole decade, the problem was largely theoretical. Governments were worried. Forward-looking industry was worried. But man in the street was saying, why are we talking about this? Since the turn of the decade, 2019, there was 5 of these incidents. The next year, there was 18. The year after, there was 23. The year after this, there's 57. This year, there's 68 incidents affecting more than 500 sites. We've gone from a state. I describe this as a state change, just like water changes from freezing to liquid, from solid to liquid. This is a state change. We've gone from a situation where for a decade the problem was mostly theoretical to one where today it's real and apparently growing exponentially.
Yes, that's right, Andrew. So this year in 2023, we found 68 incidents meet our criteria at over 500 different physical sites. So some of these incidents impact multiple sites. And after doing a bit of math and statistics, we come up with this nearly doubling factor. What do we mean by incidents are nearly doubling year over year? Well, if you look at a formula like the compound annual growth factor, or formula which is popularly used in finance or perhaps in biology for viral and bacterial growth, or even Moore's law, you'll get this calculation ending up being 1.92 times year over year. And these kinds of phenomena keep growing until they consume the underlying conditions that cause them. So for biological bacteria growth, when the food source runs out in the petri dish, they'll stop growing. But until then, they're going to keep doubling year over year until those initial conditions change. And Greg, ransomware's changed. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's changed?
Sure. It's ransomware is still the top attack approach for the industry. There's no doubt about it. However, the tactics are seemingly changing, where attackers, for the most part, are not encrypting systems as much, and demanding payment for a decryption key, but instead they're stealing data and threatening to release it unless they receive a payment. Now, this change in approach does not necessarily force down systems where where encrypting system could do that. So if more victims decide not to pay under this new attack scenario, and which is one trend I'm starting to see through my reporting on ISS source, then we might get back to the encrypting system attack method, which could then cause more physical consequences. So it's more if the attackers aren't getting what they want under the new rules, they'll go back to the old rules, and then there may be more physical change or physical consequences as a result.
So do you mean, Greg, that attacks might do more than double year over year if that happens?
I don't know that. It conceivably could, but it's more of ransomware right now. I hate to say but it's working. So if people are I don't know if victims are refuse to stop paying, so there may end up being a change, and that's pretty much it. So yes, I'm thinking that though that kind of consequence could become a lot larger.
And if I might chime in, I mean, we're predicting the future here. It's hard to say what's going to happen. My
Exactly.
own my own opinion is that instead of continuing to bounce around, I'm guessing that the ransomware threat actors, they're not one group. They're dozens of groups. They're gonna, each of the groups is going to try one thing. They're going to try the other, and they're going to settle in on something. And there's always going to be a fraction of victims who don't have information that is valuable enough to pay not to put on the internet, but still have systems that they need to keep running. So to me, I'm guessing this is going to stabilize at some point. And when it stabilizes, whatever fraction it stabilizes at, we will continue to see all ransomware attacks, the sum growing more or less the same as we see on IT networks, which is, I think, currently around 60 or 70% compounded annually. So, even if this thing stabilizes, that means the average returns to compound growth. So, I think the future has bad news in it. We can debate where it's going to go, but the evidence currently is here in front of us. Um,
Well,
More
as
detail.
well, well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say more detail. Over to you, Greg.
Well, as I've been saying that um, most attacks hitting in the industry are ransomware attacks, and we're seeing attackers are learning from and using nation state types of tactics, techniques, and procedures, which brings the sophistication up a few notches. And so, we spent some time talking about ransomware. So, let's just say ransomware is going to continue to be a top attack method. But one of the things I find interesting from this slide is on the attack type, the big piece of pie that is called unknown. And I just find it interesting that that number, that piece of the pie is so large. And it tells me a few things, but one of which is victims are just not revealing what types of attacks they're suffering. Reese, what do you think?
I agree. So I was one of the principal researchers in this report. I looked at many attacks sorting through these reports. And compared to previous years that we've published this report in, this is the first year we see such a large portion of the pie that's unknown there in red in the bottom left attack type graph. And you'll see this trend throughout other graphs as well. Now, of course, if we don't know, we don't know. So we're not going to go and speculate there. And so we can only talk about what we know about. So the unknown portion is important to try and quantify and understand how much do we know for sure this year. And this speaks to, in a way, in a sense, the volatile world we live in right now. Ultimately, regulations are changing to try and mitigate these cyber attack threats. So many organizations face difficulties and challenges, risks when they go and reveal what has happened. So many organizations are starting to have to report and file to regulators, and sometimes for very good reasons, they simply do not reveal how they were attacked. And this is a reflection of that. This year seems to be a year where very few organizations are willing to reveal what exactly occurred. They're happy to say that it's ransomware. Um, in some cases, but in many cases, they just won't even say, and so they're marked as unknown. These trends show other changes. For example, one of the things that I noticed this year uh, that is a change from previous years is that since 2020, the proportion of attacks that are attributed to hacktivists has been steadily increasing compared to the portion that's ransomware. So we're starting to see a year-over-year change of roughly 5% a year from 2021. The actual numbers are 0% activists in 2020, 8% 2021, 11 in 2022, 14 in 2023. So we see this proportional mix changing, more hacktivists involved. If we remove the unknown portion, this is the trend we see. And we are seeing a lot more direct attacks this year by nation states as well. So just to finish this, my part of this slide off, one of the things we did this year is looked at the way that systems are attacked, and the graph on the right reflects this. And we'll talk about that a bit more later. But this, maybe Andrew, you could speak a little bit to the ways that ransomware has been affecting OT.
Sure, definitely. These are the charts that you see here. Well, this year, for the first year, we tracked not just who is attacking. Is it ransomware? Is it a nation state? We tracked the kind of attack, because what we observed in previous years, and it's still the case this year, is that there's really three ways that ransomware is affecting physical operations. Some of how can any cyber attack affect physical operations? You can attack the physical operations. You can attack the OT systems directly by encrypting the HMI. You can attack the IT network only. This is the textbook is the colonial example. You can attack the IT network only, but you shut down, a safety critical physical operation because you don't trust running it while the IT network is compromised. And the third way is you attack the IT network only, and you have to shut down operations because it turns out that some of your control system or some of your physical operations depend on IT services. In the Maersk shipping example, their container tracking system was crippled. And so even though the ships could still come into port with NotPetya having crippled the IT network, even though the cranes were still working, they could not load the containers off the ships onto the waiting semi-trailer trucks because they could not figure out where these things were, where the containers were going. So these are the three ways. The stats that you see in the report will explain, how much of each. It's roughly, if I recall correctly, 25, 25, 25. It's not exactly that, but there's large fractions of each of these ways of impacting OT throughout the history of the attacks that we have. And just a word to the other panelists: we're running a little bit late, so we should try and pick this up. To that end, let me move this forward.
Okay, we're looking at what industries were hit and what and it looks like from the report this year, the discrete manufacturing sector was the hardest hit, followed by transportation and process manufacturing in that order. However, over 50% of last year's incidents had an impact on process and discrete manufacturing operations, most often causing production shutdowns, work stoppages, and or some kind of shipping delays, as Andrew was just mentioning. However, transportation continues to be a target for attackers, as it was in last year's report as well. It was the #1 industry last year, but this year it's #2. But this year discrete is leading it off.
Yeah, that's right, Greg. Also, things that we're seeing this year are some attacks on energy and critical infrastructure. The incident here you see on the slide, Denmark SectorCert, where SectorCert reported attacks on 22 critical infrastructure operations in their country of Denmark, where IT networks were breached, was a near miss. Nevertheless, we are seeing attacks on energy and the grid and oil and gas operations. They're a smaller proportion this year than the other ones we just mentioned. Also, trailing behind that is water treatment. There were a couple of low impact hits. However, there were many near misses. So in terms of what's actually in the report for water, there's the Galil Sewage Corporation shutdown, the shutdown one day, and in Ireland, a small water utility co-op in Binghamstown and Drum. 180 residents lost water. These are two of the water incidents that we saw last year. And they so initially, the first attack on Galil Sewage Corporation appeared like a hacktivist attack. There was this hacktivist group called Cyber Avengers that perpetrated this attack. Later on, we find out, in fact, that this was an attack carried out by Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So we're starting to see more nation-state attacks here in the data set on water, especially this year, and on SectorCert. Andrew, any comments?
Nope. You go for it here.
Okay, the next slide also I'll talk a little bit about. We looked also, as always, at which countries seem to be the hardest hit, that have suffered the most physical incidents. So we counted 22 overall countries in the data set out of the 68 incidents we had in 2023. And for many years running now, since 2019, the United States always seems to be the one with the most impacts, followed by Canada and Germany in no particular order. So they trade spots. So the top three countries almost always impacted are these three. Why? That's a good question. I have a hypothesis. It's very hard to know for sure. The hypothesis is these three countries have a large manufacturing base. And more importantly, because most of the attacks that we see are ransomware, they also have enough money to be worth going after. You'll also notice there are many European nations prominently featured in this list. Again, many manufacturing operations were hit in 2023, and many of these countries have money. Of course, ransomware threat actors always target anybody with money. Why don't we see more attacks on countries like perhaps China and Russia? Well, again, a hypothesis, an educated hypothesis. A couple things. First is, this is where most of these kinds of ransomware attacks originate from. People can act with impunity in jurisdictions where law enforcement may not be going after them. And on top of that, this is the origin of where most of the malware comes from that's traded on the dark web and used by ransomware threat actors. And the third reason is we simply don't always have good visibility into credible public sources of information. It could very well be there are more ransomware attacks going on in those countries, but without news or information that we can trust, we just can't tell. So there are some, but not many of those countries. Next slide, please. Or unless there's any other comments. Keep going here on specific incidents. Here are some very high-profile ransomware incidents that we saw in 2023. Earlier on in the year, Dole, the food company that produces a lot of fresh fruit products as well as lettuce, was impacted. 4 of their sites in North America were hit by ransomware. It ended up costing them quite a bit of money. They reported that it cost them a total of $10.5 million, and roughly half of those dollars were spent on restoration. So the rest were, in terms of business impact, because they had lost sales or had to throw out produce, etc., due to this incident. And they also reported these numbers in an SEC filing to the Securities and Exchange Commission. And it led to food shortages across the United States because of this ransomware attack. Another high-profile incident occurred on Granules India. This is a pharmaceutical manufacturer. So Granules India is a very large producer of generic medicines, things like Tylenol and aspirin and things you take for your headache or your cold. And the NSE there is the National Stock Exchange of India. In Mumbai, they filed with them. So they have a reporting rule there. They reported a significant loss. This was their words. They actually did not quantify this in dollars or in their local currency, but it did shut down drug production for over 40 days. This was very high profile. Why did it shut down their production? They said, their CEO stated that they depended on their IT systems, on their computers, effectively to meet regulations. What that probably means is that they need to print and track lot and batch numbers in all their medicine. And because they were unable to do so, they had to shut down the systems. And the third one I wanted to bring up, from my point of view, was a high-profile incident. Almost everybody's heard about this. It got tons of press. MGM Resorts, the legendary casino operator in Las Vegas, was hit. All their properties in the Las Vegas area were hit by ransomware. This was extremely expensive for them. They reported a $100 million loss and $10 million to restore their operations. How did it happen? Well, attackers supposedly got in through the help desk and were able to enter their network by effectively getting user access, by getting a password reset. Once they were in the system, they infected and attacked hundreds of virtual servers, VMware ESXi servers. And after MGM attempted to remediate this attack and stop it from occurring, they may have been a little bit overzealous. They shut down many of their IT systems, and this meant that they lost physical access to almost all their hotel properties. What this meant was things like room key cards and rooms, the doors were no longer operable. So there are stories of people running down the hallway, being able to open any door they like, or customers not being able to get into their rooms. This is why we count this. This is a attack that impacted their operations, their physical building automation. Greg, did you want to say anything about the other incidents on the slide?
Yeah, well, what's this year more than any other years, it was the new SEC rules are forcing companies to report losses from cyber attacks. And while the companies are not elaborating on the details of the attacks, they are reporting costs. And I just wanted to mention a few of them here. A few of them we have listed and one we don't, but MKS Instruments is the priciest one. They lost, there's 450 million associated loss with what happened with the MKS Instruments thing. MKS Instruments lost 200 million in their attack, and then one of their customers wasn't able to get their the MKS product, and therefore they ended up losing 250 million as a result of the MKS just shutting down. Johnson Controls, for instance, something that's not on this slide, they lost 27 million when they were hit with a cyber attack, and also in Clorox. So far, they've reported they've lost 49 million. And so something that we're able to check and report on through filing the SEC filings, we're able to report on get a little bit more depth of coverage and to get how much some of these companies are losing as a result of these attacks.
Really quickly to cover a couple of attacks that are novel that we saw in 2023. These were two supply chain attacks. Andrew, it's been a long time since we've seen a supply chain attack. Isn't that correct?
Indeed. I mean, there's been supply chain attacks. The big one was.
Sorry, did we lose you? I heard the big one was, and you trailed off there.
Well, it's also something that Andrew and I kind of disagreed on, but we always felt the solar wind, at least I always felt solar winds was a massive supply chain attack, a couple years back. And but I'll say that years ago, the asset inventory and visibility were a huge issue. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But over the past few years, supply chain attacks were gaining momentum, and more companies are starting to focus on software bill of materials to work on solutions to preventing or limiting attacks before they happen. I've been out in trade shows in the past couple years, and there are more and more companies starting up and focusing on how they can help prevent supply chain attacks. And it's an ongoing issue, and I quite honestly, my take is, and I'll mention this later on, but that's the biggest threat I think the industry has moving forward, even more so than ransomware attacks. But I don't know, Reese, what do you think about it?
They're certainly increasing in frequency. By the way, we did lose Andrew for a couple minutes, but he should be back in a second. Just a quick update. But yes, it's true. So these supply chain attacks mostly involve some kind of software. So SolarWinds was a software supply chain attack. And definitely there's new solutions out there to try and mitigate this. I know that only, this month there was a really high profile incident where the XZ compression library, which is found in many open source software projects, was found to have had somebody that had been committing code changes to the XZ library online through GitHub, and seems to have been trying to insert malware, and it was caught before it became committed and ended up in the final product. But even so, many open source software providers had to pull. Now, why does this matter? Well, open source software is used everywhere, including in embedded devices and industrial control system devices. Other examples of supply chain that actually made it into a report for 2023 include one where the Polish rail, the Polish National Railway Company called SPS, that's the abbreviation in Polish, accused a local train manufacturer that makes trains and cars for them called Newag, accused them of sabotaging their trains. How did they do this? Well, they alleged that Newag changed the firmware and the software inside the train cars so that when they tried to service their own trains, this software somehow detected that they were not officially going to Newag for maintenance and effectively prevented them from running their trains by bricking and preventing them from getting them out of the maintenance yards. Another example of a supply chain attack, which effectively is a software attack, was through a company called Orca FPV. They make a first-person view or a VR-style augmented reality headset for flying drones. Okay, so this is created for enthusiasts or even perhaps for military and other uses, government uses. But you can fly a drone through one of their headsets. Well, the firmware that runs all those headsets was allegedly had a time bomb firmware code planted in there, which meant that after a certain date and time, the firmware all stopped working. So effectively, they had to scramble to release patches. So you can read about it in our report. Andrew, did you want to say anything quickly about supply chain attacks if you're back with us?
I did. My apologies. My computer rebooted. Real quick, I had a podcast recently, Industrial Security Podcast with Marcus Sachs, a professor at Auburn University. He reminded me, or actually pointed me at something that sounded supply chain like, but really wasn't. I mean, apparently in the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the front line of the war moves back and forth. And when it sort of moves back towards Russia, there are sometimes sort of dead Russian tanks left in the battlefield. Apparently, the farmers in the area had started using their large, $1 million tractors to drag these tanks out of the field of action and do something with them. I don't know, sell them for scrap or something. This, I guess, annoyed the Russians, and so when the front line shifted back the other way, they took the tanks in, or sorry, they took the tractors into Russia. These John Deere tractors. The owners of the tractors were, understandably unhappy about this. They called up John Deere and said, "These are our tractors. What can you do?" And John Deere disabled the tractors remotely, so they couldn't work anymore. The defenders said, "Yay!" And Then everyone said, just a minute, what just happened here? What if, I don't know, John Deere gets it into their head that they don't like us? Will they turn off our tractor? What happens if someone like the Russians breaks into the John Deere control center and turns off all of the tractors in all the nations of the world that they don't like? This is bad. So this was, we did not count it as a supply chain incident because the owners of the tractors asked the vendor to disable, the property of the owners. So that it was not an attack. It was, a control action taken by authorized individuals. But the whole question of what could happen has been opened up. That Pandora's box is open now, and we're wondering what this is going to mean for us in the future.
Absolutely, Andrew. I think to all the modern electric cars and all the automated taxis that people are hoping to deploy in the near future, and this is a concern that I'm not sure if people have thought through. Okay, so quickly, I wanted to cover another novel attack we saw in 2023 that was quite concerning, and this concerns GPS jamming and spoofing. Now, we're running out a little bit of time here, so please go to our report and read more about this. But the most significant aspect here is the GPS and IRS spoofing that occurred in the Middle East starting in around August and moving on throughout the year. So what is this exactly? Well, GPS jamming is not a new thing. It's been around for a very long time, but the scale of it has been increasing. Spoofing is different. Spoofing is not just denying you access to your GPS in your phone or commercial planes or shipping. It means sending fake messages that look legitimate out across a certain part of the globe and fooling systems into thinking they're in one position when they're in fact in a completely different one by altering and overpowering the signals in the area that you would normally receive through your GPS. And keep in mind, GPS is satellite based, so the transmitters are very far away from the Earth. So by the time the signal gets to the Earth, it's weak, so very susceptible to jamming. And now we're starting to use these for all kinds of things, including in commercial aircraft. So what occurred in the Middle East was that this GPS spoofing caused airplanes to fly off course when the plane told the pilots and the navigators that it was in fact on course. And in certain regions of the world, this is extremely dangerous. So why is this counted as an incident in our report? Well, in effect, navigation systems on modern aircraft are control systems, and they can fly the plane and they can keep it on course through autopilot, etc. So having spoofing signals that, for example, are sending dozens of planes into airspace that they don't expect to be in volatile regions of the world is extremely dangerous. But worse than that, some planes reported that they weren't able to navigate at all and effectively went into an emergency situation where they had to ask air traffic control, where am I and where am I heading? Help. So this was an emergency situation. No plane, no modern civilian aircraft leaves the ground without working GPS. So there's a little bit more nuances to it. There's something called an inertial reference system that's also involved. I don't think we have time to go into that right now, but the most important takeaway here is that when you lose navigation on board an aircraft, this is an emergency, and you no longer can precisely know where you are. And in a busy, especially dangerous part of the world, this is a huge risk. Andrew, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, let me say a couple of things. One is I was overseas last week, at an event in Singapore. People from all over the world were there. I was talking to some folks from the Nordic nations, and they said, yeah, they've almost given up using GPS just for driving around the city because it's constantly being spoofed. The GPS shows that they're in the middle of the ocean or something stupid like this. Even more sort of mundane, car thieves all over the world are buying these GPS.
I hope we didn't lose you again there, Andrew.
Jammers on. Sorry?
I thought we lost you for a second. You broke up, but keep going there.
Okay. These jammers are cheap. When they steal a car, they put the jammer on it so that the manufacturer, so that the owner cannot track the vehicle, so that the police cannot track them down. these stolen vehicles are driving onto ferries. Sometimes the stolen vehicles are inside of trucks that are driving onto ferries. Now the ferries are navigating the waters without GPS. This is a problem. A lot of industrial operations rely on GPS, sometimes for location, sometimes for timing, and it sounds like we just cannot count on that anymore the way we used to be able to, with widespread use of jamming and increasing use of spoofing.
Absolutely, Andrew.
When we talk about Volt Typhoon, you have a lot of people in the industry worried, especially in the government. Volt Typhoon is People's Republic of China's state-sponsored attack group that looks to compromise the environments of multiple critical infrastructure organizations, primarily in communications, energy, transportation, and water and wastewater systems. And the level of hysteria, and I don't know if hysteria is the right word, but that level regarding Volt Typhoon has been unprecedented. Security agencies across the globe are uniting to ensure everyone from users and operators to executives even understand the threat posed by this group. And much like asset owners need a plan to ensure they're on top of the threats from all these new technologies that are out there, they also need a plan, and everyone needs to know what to do if attacked by this actor or this type of actor, because they're out there, and the government, to their credit, is really giving plenty of people notice. And to me, when the government is this active talking about something like a Volt Typhoon, they know more than they're letting on. So that tells me that there's a big issue here.
Yeah, I agree, Greg. I was just in Washington, D.C. on Monday speaking to some water utilities, and this is the talk around the table. And people are having trouble quantifying this risk. What is, the risk the Volt Typhoon poses to everybody, not only to the United States and their territories where they have service and supply agreements to supply water and power and other things to the U.S. government, but it concerns local utilities now too. They're all worried that somebody might be in their networks, and it's supposed to have been cleaned up. What's the worry here? Effectively, it may not be as serious as a situation like the safety systems that were attacked in the Triton attacks. So here we have a situation where the IT networks were penetrated. There's no evidence yet that anybody triggered anything on the OT network through the Volt Typhoon living off the land attacks. However, there's that worry that they might have had the ability and could have demonstrated it. But the so far the only thing that makes people feel a little bit better, if you can say that, is that OT systems were not deliberately targeted or attacked in this case. Still, it seems like they had the ability to do so. And as you said, perhaps there's more to the story here. This is, being dealt with perhaps at a government level. People are looking into this in a much deeper way.
Well, I'll also say, I mean, the idea of living off the land tells me that that's what they're doing. They're living off the land, and maybe they're just lying in wait. You don't know. And the more everybody stays on top of the system and they're aware of it, the better off everybody's going to be.
And one of the things that people found distressing about it was that living off the land characteristic, which makes it an extremely difficult attack to detect. I mean, a lot of people have been putting intrusion detection systems on their OT systems in hopes of improving their security posture. But if you cannot detect the attack, these people are in there and it's just silent. It's very disturbing. But that was one example of a near miss, because Volt Typhoon did not take anything down. Another example of a near miss was the sector cert in Denmark. When this was announced a number of months ago, I happened to be in Denmark at the conference where it was announced. I had opportunity to sit down with these folks. This was a Russian attack on critical infrastructure providers. Now, what the sector cert does is they have network taps on the internet-facing firewalls of some 300 utilities in the nation. They, take a copy of the tap data. They run it through intrusion detection, and they can see, they raise alarms. So their job is to monitor and alert. That's what they do. They found these attacks on Zixel firewalls, exploiting a known vulnerability, getting into the IT network. They raised the alarm. Initially, Sector Cert identified a second wave of attack that they thought was, and they identified the attackers in the first case as Russian. In the second wave, they thought initially that this was a second wave of Russian attack, but further analysis by Forescout later on identified it as an unrelated attack that was much more widespread, much more indiscriminate, not really targeting critical infrastructures or Denmark, whereas that did seem to be a characteristic of the first attack. A confusing thing about the report was the word islanding. The report said a lot of these utilities went into island mode. Now, in the electric sector, that means you disconnect a chunk of the grid from the main grid. It's a physical consequence. I asked them what this word meant, and they said, no. They used the word to mean they disconnected their internet-facing firewall from the internet and left it that way until they could apply the patch to the firewall.
Yes, Andrew. And, when I first saw this attack, it immediately grabbed my attention. Why I spent some time doing transmission line and substation engineering. And I was very keen to understand what this island mode meant. I'm glad that I found out what it actually meant, that it was about disconnecting their internet systems, because it does mean a completely different thing. So I asked myself, why does this sector cert near miss matter? And to me, there's three main things that matter to me about this. It's the sophistication, determination of the attackers. They were really determined to penetrate the internet-facing firewalls here. And it's the scale of what they targeted. As Andrew said, they noticed an attack on 22. There's over 300 in membership base of Sector Cert. And it took a very large cooperative effort once this attack was detected by these sensors to go after and ensure that systems were safe and that the attack had not penetrated deeper beyond these firewalls and these outer IT networks into critical infrastructure.
I just want to say a quick hats off to the Sector Cert folks, because of all the quick thinking and not being afraid of working long hours, were just some of the key attributes that kept the whole critical infrastructure up and running after those attacks. And success in security is all about collaboration. You see it all the time. And the case was, 22 companies ended up compromised around the same time with possible involvement by the state actors like Russia. But in the end, they're able to fight off the attackers. So through that whole idea of collaboration and willing to work is really helped save the day.
I agree, Greg, and I really appreciate it that they worked very hard not only to collaborate and stop the attack, but also document it and try and bring as much credibility and information available so that everybody else can learn from what happened to them. Don't you think?
Well, I agree. I mean, they wrote I think, well, I don't know if it's the equivalent of a white paper, but and you read through it, it's just fascinating, the timeline and what was going on and what they were thinking the whole time. It was truly again, they did a great job.
I agree.
Okay, switching gears, that's sort of a summary of in a sense, the bad news in the threat report. It's a threat report. It's about bad news. We always like to finish with a bit of good news, sort of just tracking the biggest news on the defensive side in the year that we're reporting. We reported this year on cyber-informed engineering. In my opinion, this is the most important development in OT security since the phrase OT security was coined in 2005. Reese, you're going to introduce it, but I just wanted to go on record saying this is a new way of looking at the problem. It's a very important way of looking at the problem. The people that I've talked to about cyber engineering have, basically told me, Andrew, this just makes sense. Why is this new? Why have we not been looking at the problem this way for the last 20 years? This shouldn't be new. So, Reese, can you take us through what it is?
Absolutely. So cyber-informed engineering is like a coin with two sides. And on the one side of the coin, the goal here is to teach engineers cybersecurity. And the second part of the coin is to have engineers do cybersecurity in designs. And this is a challenge, but it can be done. Why does this matter? Why is this so impactful? Well, as an engineer myself, this immediately spoke to me. And it's because it speaks to things that engineers are very good at. And one of the things that they do very well is they have been, the engineering profession has been managing risks to public and worker safety for centuries. It says a century on the slide. I'm willing to go back a bit farther. This is what we do. We have not only an ethical and moral obligation as an engineers to do this, but it's something that we're paid to do, and this is what we do. So, how about an example? So, people have been doing cybersecurity for ages. What's new here? Well, think about this particular example. If your life depends on a boiler not exploding, so you work every day in a power plant, and next to you is a steam boiler, and let's say that a cyber attack would occur and it would get into the control system that manages, regulates, and operates this boiler. Would you prefer a mechanically spring-loaded valve, or perhaps 3 or 4 of them that are redundant, protecting you from an overpressure situation where the boiler could explode and kill everybody in the room? Or would you prefer a longer password on the PLC? Well, I know what I'd prefer. I'd like some mechanical protections. Thank you very much. Why? Because they will deterministically every single time protect your life and everybody around you by releasing that pressure. Whereas a longer password on a PLC, please, there are people now that are very adept at cracking passwords. That's not a very good cybersecurity protection. But how about we just find a way to solve the problem that is more efficient and basically is more deterministic than something that may work some of the time, maybe. This is what engineers do best. They look at the problem from a different point of view, and they work together with other groups like the IT department to make this happen. Another example is manual operations. Can we still operate systems manually? So, by the way, going back to the Neutronics controllers attack we talked about in water this year, Galil Sewage Corporation and Bingsham and Drum in Ireland went down because they were not able to run manually after they were compromised by a cyber attack. But Aliquippa Water, for example, and dozens of other utilities in the US were able to, because they were able to bypass the controller that had been impacted and run manually and keep distributing water or running their chemical processes in their treatment plants in order to keep running. So another thing that engineers bring to the table is this kind of solution. Andrew, did you want to talk a little bit about bridges, perhaps?
I did, and let me say just first, the reason this is new, I mean, not the reason, the sense in which it's new. Think about it. Where's the overpressure valve in ISO 27001? It's not there. Where is manual operations in 62443? It's not there. These are cybersecurity standards, but the valves and manual operations, these are engineering tools for managing risk. These tools don't exist in cybersecurity. So this is the thing. We need to bring both of these sets of tools to the table. And the beauty of most of these engineering type tools is that they're engineering grade. They're deterministic. So for example, imagine, I mean, we had 2 weeks ago, a tragedy in Baltimore. A boat hit a bridge. The bridge collapsed. 7 people died. When we expect bridges not to collapse. I mean, imagine that the engineering profession has invented a way to build suspension bridges at 1/3 of today's cost. Imagine, I don't know, carbon fiber or something. Imagine that the problem with the new design is that it's absolutely riddled with harmonic frequencies. I mean, all of us old folk can remember the Tacoma Narrows disaster, one of the world's first really big suspension bridges. Harmonic frequency, a stiff breeze came up, started the bridge oscillating, and it tore itself apart. It just built up. This is what harmonic frequencies do. Imagine that the new bridge design, carbon fiber, whatever, is riddled with harmonic frequencies. People walking across the bridge will start the harmonics going, and you risk the bridge tearing itself apart if it builds up enough. Imagine that the bridge feels rock solid because we have active dampers, multiply redundant hydraulic dampers, multiply redundant power supplies, AI computers controlling the dampers. The bridge feels rock solid. How happy would any of us be driving across that bridge every day to work if we knew that the design engineer hoped that if a cyber attack targeted the AI, that we could detect the attack before the bridge tore itself apart? How happy would we be knowing that the design engineer hoped that if we could detect the attack in time, that we could scramble an incident response team to protect the AI before the attack compromised it and the bridge tore itself apart? Hope is not what we expect of the engineering profession. We expect bridges to be designed to support a specified load for a specified number of decades in a specified operating environment. Similarly, when public safety is at risk, automation engineers are expected to put designs in place that will support a given cyber threat load, operate in a given cyber threat environment until, and do so reliably, deterministically, until at least the next opportunity to upgrade our security systems with a large margin for error. This is what's expected of us. This is the new perspective of CIE. And it's absolutely doable if we bring engineering approaches and engineering tools into play that don't exist in the IT space.
Absolutely, Andrew. And I just want to very quickly say that we should mention that the Cyber Informed Engineering program is part of the Department of Energy and IDO National Labs. You can go and Google CIE, Cyber Informed Engineering, and probably on your first hit, you'll end up on their website. You can download their National Cyber Informed Engineering Strategy Guide, which was released last year, or actually, I think late 2022. And then they have released their implementation guide, which is a series of questions that design engineers can ask themselves when they're designing a cybersecure design from cradle to grave. And recently, very, very recently, only last month, they've released a digital version of their implementation guide. They call it their CSET or CIE cybersecurity evaluation tool. And this is an interactive program. It is a web app, but you download it to your local machine. So all the answers and information you put in this tool is not sent over the internet. You put it on your local machine, you run it, and it will help you look at a system, look at a design, look at a problem, and ask important questions in order to arrive at hopefully a more cyber secure design. Thank you.
Okay. The other bit of good news is, I've got my third book launched late last year. It is rooted in the cyber-informed engineering perspective, but bluntly, the CIE outputs have been produced by PhDs, and they can be a little challenging for mere mortals to read. So the title of the new book is Engineering Grade OT Security, A Manager's Guide. I tried to provide examples. I tried to tell stories. I ultimately tried to answer the question using the CIE perspective how can we tell when we're done? How much security do we need? How much engineering do we need in a given circumstance or site? How much cybersecurity do we need? And how do we make those decisions? And it included, of course, introductions to what is OT, an OT system, what is OT security, how do attacks work, what is the engineering perspective. So I tried to walk people through, but the punchline the book leads up to is a discussion of, given a system, how can you, what kind of process can you go through? What kind of decisions do you have to make to figure out how much protection that system warrants in the engineering perspective?
The beauty of the book, Andrew, and I mean, is that it's not just, it's a technical book, but it's not technical to the point where you can't read it. As you were saying, it's very, very relatable, very manageable. And I was one of the reviewers. So I was able to get through it and work through it and read it and actually enjoyed getting through it and seeing examples, that kind of thing. And I was able, and I learned quite a few different things about the subject. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I
And
reviewed it.
I was
Sorry.
going to say, thank you, both of you, for being um, reviewers.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
I
still
loved it,
waiting for my
Andrew.
signed book.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
I loved it, Andrew, because it wasn't filled with math and all those things that I did before when I was a university student, and I love how accessible it is. I think of it as the ultimate desk reference. I've got it on my desk, easy to thumb through, easy to find a topic you're looking for if you've forgotten about something or are wondering, what would Andrew do? I thumb through it and I find some insight and wisdom on every little page, and really packed it full of pretty much, I think, everything you've learned in your career into this little book. And I really appreciate that.
I do try. Thank you both for your kind feedback. But let's move on here. Greg, can you tell us a few bits about sort of the bigger picture of ICSStrive and where it fits in the world?
Sure. Well, again, as I said before, and I'll keep it brief, but we cover security, threats, regulations, incidents, and vulnerabilities by experts, and we try to. Our site ICS Drive is a database, and we give examples. We give as much information about the incident as possible. You can search. For industries, you can search for countries, you can search for companies, you can search for attackers, the kind of malware they're introducing. The search engine is able to go through there. So if you're in I don't know, the oil and gas industry, you can see what kind of attacks are hitting that industry, chemical, et cetera, et cetera. And it's something we're trying to, it's everybody can get on it. It's not gated at all. And it's there to help the industry. And the more people that get to it and look at it, the better off everybody's going to be.
And it's been around for a few years. And one of the things that I love about it is that it looks like it's going to survive. It's a business model that makes sense. You, as a journalist, have to do this research anyway, and so it only makes sense that you record what you've done in this. Other incident repositories have come and gone, and I think it's in large part because the people behind them had to do something extra. This was sort of extra to what they normally do, where else as your work at ISS Source, this is in a sense integral to what you do. So I'm glad that the industry finally has a repository that has got some legs.
Well, I agree. And one quick thing is, I'm doing a story on ISS Source about, these companies that the costs of all these attacks, for example. So we do a story on Johnson Controls. We do a story on, all the other ones. And I'm trying to remember some, I just forgot them all. But we're doing these stories, and to what your point is, Andrew, is yes, we're doing the story on ISS Source to put the bare bones in the ICS Drive, then use all the ISS Source and all the other publications out there as a resource So if you want to get more information, you can go there too. So I think it's like a one-stop shop for a lot of for users out there.
Cool. A few words about Waterfall Security. We have been around for, what is it now, 17 years. We are an OT security technology provider. Our flagship product is the unidirectional security gateway. It's used heavily in heavy industry, critical industrial infrastructure, manufacturing, and the largest of building automation, data centers, casinos, this kind of thing. We are, have offices around the world. We are trusted by pretty much all of the different kinds of critical industrial infrastructures all over the world. And, come to the waterfall-security.com website. We're happy to have you look around. If we could finish up, Greg, do you want to take us through this? What are the key takeaways in your mind?
Well, all right. Well, I'll be quick. But whenever you do a report like this, it's easy to play into the fear, uncertainty, and doubt factor. And while I just can't stand that, but what we try when we try to avoid that, but we all know attacks are continuing. There are more of them, and they are getting more sophisticated. That's kind of a given. But we also know ransomware and phishing attacks are going to continue. But what is interesting and something we have talked about for a few years is people have to watch out for the growing issue of supply chain attacks, as I had mentioned earlier. And which I think could potentially be more dangerous than ransomware. But I also think that security professionals are doing a great job. They're working to keep systems up and running and continuing to make product. But I also see that it's a never-ending process of planning and warding off attacks. And especially with a shortage of security professionals out there, that's a tough job. But I mean, I think, security professionals out there are just doing an awesome job. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll take it over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, let me say just one more word. I think in part the report is designed as a tool to communicate with business decision makers. Um, People need justification. If you're going to spend money to do anything, they need to see why would they spend any money. And as I said, for a decade, the threat seemed largely theoretical. We know that this report is an underestimate of what's out there in the world because we only count public disclosures. I've had people disclose, consequential events to me in private, and we could not count those events. So we know this is an underestimate, and still it's increasing exponentially. So this is evidence that we're trying to provide a tool to the industry, to practitioners in the industry who need to sit down with senior management and have informed conversations with them. Reese, did you want to jump in? I need to do some housekeeping here. We're running a little over time. Reese?
Yes, no, I mean, I just want to quickly wrap up by saying that we appreciate any feedback that you may have. If you disagree with the way we attributed incidents, please write us. You see our emails there on the slide. We love the feedback. We worked so hard in this report because, as Andrew said, this is a great tool that you can take and use. We've tried to pack this report, with serious, credible information that is professional you can use to do your job better and give you justification and answers in context for the cyber-informed engineering you might be doing, or any other kind of cybersecurity deployments that might be coming up, or things that you're planning. So please, feedback, highly welcome. Please download the report, and thank you for joining our webinar today.